Hey everyone, I'm Noverb, and we are coming off of the Peasant Eternal Spring Open for 2023, and I have with me today Phoenix, who won the event with Xenon Mandrakes. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, no verb. Thank you.
So, how are you feeling after that win?
Yeah, I'm feeling great to be honest. It's my first tournament win, I think, in Eternal. I've come close a couple of times, and had high finishes in Opens, and I went to Worlds. But it's actually the first tournament I managed to win completely, so that felt good to finally do it.
Yeah, it must have, and obviously you went to Worlds, so you had to have, had some success. So it's not always about the winning. Sometimes it is just about consistent finishes, and like this is the first one that you've spiked and actually got the win, but that doesn't exactly determine success.
Yeah, there's a lot of different factors in those tournaments, and for sure when you have single eliminations, there's matchups, you also have a lot of very good opponents. Yeah, there's lots of stuff that's not in your control always. But yeah, when you finally manage to do it and win the whole thing, yeah, I was really thrilled about that afterwards.
That's great. So how was your preparation for the event?
Um, this is probably gonna sound a little silly, but I didn't prepare that well, to be honest. Uh, and that is because my life is pretty busy at the moment. I have a full-time job and a son who is 1.5 years old right now. And the nights are often still rough because he still wakes up in the middle of the night, so my sleep is disrupted at least once a night to change diapers and give him his milk, etc. So I often have to go to sleep pretty early, and my time for Eternal is pretty limited. So for preparation, it was actually only solo practice that I did. So I did gauntlet runs. And yeah, I used the deck list that mostly you provided in Peasant Eternal Discord or in the last community primer, which is already a year old, I think. And I made some changes here and there, and I tried it out in gauntlet runs and see how far I would get with the different deck lists. And I also read the content you put out on the text channels in the Peasant Eternal Discord about win rates of decks in the past to see where I would start for my deck selection. Um,
And it's
yeah, and
also interesting that that information that I put out originally was incorrect, or at least was very biased towards top eights, because for the majority of the time until very recently, I didn't have access to the whole of the tournaments. I only had access to the deck lists for top eights or top 16s or what have you. And
oh, okay, okay.
I was missing all the times that like people brought these decks but then didn't do well, like went 0-2 drop or went that like 2-3 or something, which would have really affected the win rates of certain decks because as a deck gets more popular, uh, there are good runs and bad runs, right? It doesn't matter how good or
Hmm.
bad you are as a player, but sometimes you just run poorly. Sometimes you face bad matchup in the bad matchup, you lose both, and you just I don't want to play anymore and drop.
Oh yeah,
So
okay.
it's very interesting to look at the original numbers that I posted because it showed Mandrakes as a very high win rate. It showed FTS Sacrifice as a very high win rate, but it also showed FTJ as a very high win rate, I think, and that was all because there were decks and runs that were not being presented because I only had the win rates of those good runs.
Okay. But didn't you update the
Yeah,
list a couple days
I
later or
updated
something?
I updated it. I think it was like 3 or 4 days before the tournament. Jedi was
Yeah.
able to get me those numbers on the like Wednesday before the tournament when we did our prep.
Okay, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, so yeah, I knew that data was limited, so I took them with a grain of salt, of course. So, but I was mostly looking at the decks that were all also played a lot or indeed had a lot of top 8 finishes. Um, and thought, yeah, that has to mean something.
For sure.
um, so yeah, I started my practice with a Mandrake list I ended up with because yeah, I am a spike and I wanted to win the tournament.
Okay.
And I've already had it happen a couple of times where I thought, yeah, this is the deck to beat. Everyone knows it. They're gonna be gunning for it. I'm not gonna play it, but I just wanted to start with the best deck to see how it would play and to get a feel for it and to see like how can this be attacked? Does it have many weaknesses? And it actually went pretty good in the gauntlets. Very easy runs. Um, but then, yeah, I also noticed that the tournament that Mandrakes was running really hot with Spiff's win, and I think 3 people in the top 8, including you on Mandrakes,
Uh,
if I'm
I, I
correct.
I believe that first tournament I didn't actually run Mandrakes. I think
Okay, okay.
uh, how that went was I wrote the primer after looking at the new set, and there was a tournament like 2 weeks later. So I wrote the primer. Mandrakes actually wasn't like that big on that list because I had a very bad version. It was
Hmm.
before I started thinking about the ultimate side of things. I was just like thinking about Mandrakes themselves. And
Hmm.
after some iterations, I included stuff like Xenon Life Speaker. I did both grafters instead of one, and allowed it to trigger your lords on command, which I think was very important. Like it
Hmm.
was a good epiphany for the deck. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and so at the time, I think from that primer, the standout best deck was Dredge. It was just like so
Okay.
powerful. It was killing people on turn 4 and 5. And then I'm just like, hey guys, let me try out this deck. And they're like, oh, but Mandrakes doesn't seem very good. And then I just like, I beat Dredge over and over and over. It was like 8-1 or something.
Oh, wow.
And I'm just like, I think this deck actually has legs. So everyone else was like, no, 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 I think that's a fluke. Like, it's only the one deck. Nobody's going to run it. So I think like Prakalakin, the Evermaster, they all ran Dredge decks for that tournament. And then Spifferific picked up Shoal Stirrings. I think Collector picked up the Mandrake's deck.
Yeah.
And I ended up on Unseen because Unseen has a special place in my heart. And I
Okay,
didn't even
okay.
top 8 that, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Um, but it ended up with Collector and Spifferific in the finals of the like debut of Mandrakes.
Yeah, I know, and I think there was also someone else who got fourth place or something. It was actually, I think, 3 Mandrakes list in that top 8, so it was pretty insane.
Yeah.
Uh, but then I noticed that the tournament after, it was Theo who won on FTS SAC.
Yep.
Well, there were a lot of players on Mandrakes that tournament. Um, so yeah, then that's when I was starting to explore FTS SEC because I thought, yeah, uh, it seems that if in that tournament there was a lot of Mandrakes and Theo must have faced it a couple of times. He also faced it in the finals, I think, during that tournament.
Yeah, let's talk about that. That was the first deck you tested with after Mandrakes, right? So let's try
Yeah,
that out.
yeah.
So is that this list with the Nahid's distillations? So that
Yeah, I think it is.
the
Yeah,
one without red,
with
it had the 4 fear trackers, the 2 Nahid's
yeah,
distillations.
yeah, yeah. Indeed, that
So
was the one.
the upside this deck has against Mandrakes is that it's playing the 4 of rectifiers, and that allows you
Yeah,
to silence the Mandrakes and make it so
yeah,
their grafters aren't working, make it so their lords don't work, and
yeah,
you have the Kindling Carvers as a way to generate value over time to like outgrind them after you stop them.
yeah. Yeah. So I was thinking that it has more value, it has more draw. So I could see if people were gonna bring mandrakes, I could see FTS SEC having an advantage in the matchup. So that's when I switched over to this list and started to run this in the gauntlet to see if I liked it more in my practice. Um, and yeah, for I think actually I was for a long time thinking to bring FTS SEC because yeah, I also like drawing cards. I like Carver. I like the grindiness and all the 2-for-1s that that list has. You also then have I was trying out yeah, Zido also in the space of the Gleaming Grenadin.
Sure.
Uh,
That's a good way to.
then I saw that you put out another list of FTS SEC that you were testing with Homesick Yeti, which you could flip to Red the High Roller pretty easily in this list by going Display of Destruction plus a power or the Machinations. And then yeah, then it becomes pretty sick. If you have Red, it feels so unfair what you're doing in this format. You can play an extra card each turn. Yeah, that's pretty insane.
It's like
So
a second Kindling Carver in that respect, where it is just
yeah,
drawing you an extra card, except you don't have to pay for it, and it pays you. I think that
yeah,
the downside of that is there was one game in testing where the Overmaster flipped a red and then played an Aramot's Machinations off the top when there was only one unit in the discard pile, so that was just one of their Machinations gone forever. Um, but I've also seen a screenshot of the Overmaster's run where they had 4 flipped reds in play.
yeah. Yeah, that was such a silly screenshot during the tournament.
Yeah. I wish that we had that match on camera.
Yeah, that would have been fun. Yeah. So yeah, for a lot of the time actually, as for tournament prep, I was on FTS SEC, and I was pretty convinced I was gonna be bringing that. Gonna have a sip of my coffee here. Mm. But yeah, then the last couple of days before the tournament, I started stumbling with the deck a little bit sometimes because I found out that sometimes a deck has trouble with early pressure,
Yep.
especially if you don't have a good combination, like for example Carver plus enough bodies or Naid's Faithful to stem the bleeding. Also, the deck sometimes feels clunky because they nerfed a lot of the corrupted units and they disappear in the same turn as you sag them.
Sure.
So you don't end up with enough bodies.
Well, I think
Um,
specifically in this deck, it was always that way. I think Two-Face was always an X1 and Rectifier was always an X1, so they would
hmm,
always be removed in the same turn. I
okay,
don't
okay,
I don't
yeah,
think Corrupted was changed for this deck specifically.
yeah. Yeah, that could be. Uh, I haven't been playing Eternal from the start on. So I've only been around for 3 years, I think. So I don't have all the history of the deck units. Um, but also, yeah, another thing that it can sometimes stumble on is that you're playing a 3-faction deck, of course.
Right.
So sometimes you run into trouble with your factions. The influence requirements are not nothing. You need double shadow for the removal spell and double time for the rectifier.
Yeah, I know
Yeah,
some previous iterations of this deck and archetype were running Interloper as a way to sacrifice for
yeah,
Carver and also a way to fix your power.
yeah. I was also thinking about that, but yeah, Interloper was also nerfed, I think, so it
Yeah,
also
that
dies in the
is one
same
that
turn.
was nerfed, yep.
Yeah, and if you put in Interloper, then you have to cut other cards, and that's gonna hurt you in the long run with your card advantage, I think. So yeah, and I noticed it in the Gauntlet runs, of course, because you can't redraw to 6 in Gauntlet also. So there are some hands where you are having a bad second hand and you can go to 6. But then I was thinking about it like, yeah, even if you could go to 6, I don't want to go to 6 too a lot in the tournament because that's also going to hurt your win rate. You're going to be up versus very good players. So if you have a deck that's going to have to go to 6 more because you're playing a 3-faction deck, that's also not always going to be very good.
Absolutely.
Um, so all those things combined, I went back to the Mandrake list, started running that again, and was like, yeah, I feel more certain that this deck is going to do me well in the tournament than that FTS sec is going to do me well. Uh, I think it's more high risk, high reward with FTS sec, and Mandrakes may have been the more safe choice. Um, but also, yeah, because Mandrakes can run eavesdrop main deck more easily than FTS sec can, and I feel like eavesdrop is at the moment one of the best cards in the format. So yeah, that's also another advantage.
Yeah, for
Together then,
sure. Being able to counter your own opponents playing mandrakes by removing their mandrakes out of the void, giving it to yourself,
yeah, yeah,
countering revenge because they no longer have access to their destiny units in the discard pile. It can even, in some cases, counter the Skycrag control decks that popped up this tournament by
yeah,
like removing their Aegis with Vara's favor and that, or with Darkwater Vines and then eavesdropping them to take
yeah,
away their discard pile so they can't kill you with Tomb of the Azure Mage.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Um, so yeah, that's the reason I think I only made the switch back to Mandrakes like the last evening before the tournament or something. That was one night I stayed up longer because I was still very undecided on what to run. Stumbles with FTS sec and then just went back to Mandrakes and called it a night. Yeah.
Sure. So,
Um,
what are some card choices specifically? Did you make any changes to the deck after you grabbed it?
no, I think I just ran your version card for card. Um,
Was this the
because yeah,
version that I posted in the Discord, or was this like one from a previous tournament?
I think it was the one you posted in the last one you posted in the Discord.
Oh, okay.
Uh, yeah. Um, so it has I think it's very similar to what Spiff ran to in his tournament.
Right.
And now only it has the 3 eavesdrops main instead of the what's it called, the 2/1 deadly, which mills the
Oh,
opponent for 2
Two-Face.
cards. Two-Face, yeah.
Yeah, I
Um,
believe that what happened was Two-Face got cut to add another Vara's favor and 3 eavesdrops.
yeah. Uh, yeah. I'm not sure if I think in the original version Spiff format he also had 3 favors. So I think it was just the Two-Face for the 3 eavesdrops, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
I believe in the list that I gave him, it was 2 favors, but if he added one over the time, then that was probably correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I after playing in the tournament, I felt before the tournament as well, like they're pretty similar. They both give you power, extra power because you go pretty heavy. You go up to 5 for the reanimation spell. Um, but I think they both serve their purposes. Like the Virus Favor, like you said, it can remove a face Aegis, which I didn't know would be important before the tournament because I for sure didn't predict people to bring Skycare Control. But the
So,
other thing it of course does is it gains you life, which is important for one of your lords.
right.
Um,
It's important to note for Mandrakes, part of that like epiphany that I was mentioning earlier, you have to play this game of making sure that your units can ultimate.
yeah.
And while you have Speed Grafter, you have Vine Grafter, you have Xenon Light Speaker, all that can ultimate as you pay for them, things like Venomous Nightshade requires you to gain an instance of life.
Yep.
Darkwater Vines requires you to, or requires any player to discard a card. And
Hmm.
with the printing of Eavesdrop, with the Dredge getting more of a thing, like there's Carver. If a Carver can't play the card that they draw, if the Draconic Looting can't play all the cards it draws, it forces them to discard no matter what. So the requirements of discarding were a little bit less, so Darkwater Vines can just kind of exist as it is. And now, especially like with Unleash against Skycrag, there was in the finals a few instances where Lord Perth
Hmm.
made an absolute like run for your Darkwater Vines because they
Hmm.
wanted to get rid of them before it would break Aegis when they discarded a card because the Unleash card couldn't be played.
Yeah. Yeah, he must have felt that I had Eavesdrop in my hand the whole time during that last game.
He was definitely
Uh,
playing for it. I know
yeah.
in the interview he made mention that if he didn't have Aegis yet, he wanted to make Darkwater Vines ultimate at any cost to just get more spells into his void, and then as soon as
hmm
he had an Aegis, it was time to kill Darkwater Vines.
Yeah. Yeah, that was yeah, a very tense game, a very fun game as well. Uh, yeah. Um, yeah, so for card choices. Yeah, so I like the 3-3 split between the favors and the eavesdrop. Yeah, also the three eavesdrops are amazing in the mirror, of course, like you said. Um, but then yeah, the favor is amazing in other matchups like versus aggro or yeah, like versus FDS sec if you can kill a carver with it, that also feels great.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think
You're
that's
also
where this.
playing the four of Defile and four of Victimless
Yeah,
Crime, meaning that you are
yeah,
really playing that mid-range game plan.
yeah. Those are amazing removal spells. Yeah, for sure. So no, yeah, and the sideboard market also was I think well thought out. So I just ran with the list you posted. Yeah, and after a lot of matches versus the count that I felt like I used all the cards um, in the market as well at certain times. So I kept it as this, and it worked out. Yeah,
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'm still questioning is with the curtain call and your ability to make sure that curtain call has the second ability active, and then
yeah,
like clinging scavenger, Elysian Flyers hasn't really been as much of a thing as I predicted, so that card becomes a little bit worse, although it does fly over like opposing Mandrake matchups.
yeah, yeah. I think Scavenger was amazing. Uh, the tournament. Yeah. Also the second, the ability that when units go to your void, it grows is also insane with your eavesdrop.
Yeah, Eavesdrop will take
Uh,
all of their units, put them into your void, and trigger it that many times.
yeah, that's just bonkers. And yeah, in the mirror, it's amazing. And yeah, I think even versus Skycarrier control, if you can get it out of range, if you can give it regen, they can also have a lot of trouble because it grows if they kill the rest of your board. So yeah, I think the Scavenger is solid. But yeah, what you said about Curtain Call, uh, it it comes up that you don't have the 4-time influence, and that's pretty rough. But on the other hand, it's such a unique effect, and it yeah certainly with Skycrack Control coming up now, it's one of your best cards versus them to grab from the market, so they can't kill your units on a crucial turn. So I think I would still run it. I think the only card in the market which I'm still thinking about if I would run Mandrakes again in the next event, which I don't know I will yet, but um, is wait, let me bring it up. It's the Disrupt. Uh,
Right. That
yeah, the
so
Disrupt. Kill an
that's
enemy
a
relic or silence an enemy unit for 3 power. I didn't see a lot of relics, to be honest. And yeah, if it's only for silencing an enemy units, it's also pretty expensive. So
it
that's
is, however, one of the few ways to get rid of relics. The other ones
yeah,
being Minotaur Lighthoof, I believe, and then there's like a
yeah,
scavenging card that both of which make them sacrifice a relic instead of actually getting rid of the one you choose. And I feel like
yeah.
getting rid of one you choose is very important.
Yeah, I think it is, but it just boils down to if you think people are gonna have such high impact relics that you need to kill. And I feel like in this tournament, almost no one was doing that, apart from Spiff probably. And yeah, that was already such an atrocious matchup, so I don't know if that one. I used this market slot versus him, and the matchup was still pretty awful. So
It's also very hard to, when we're talking about the relic being a Watchwing support, it's hard to get that removal out of the market. Like you're playing Grafter, then you're paying 3, then you're playing Disrupt.
Yeah,
That's like 3 full turns to
yeah,
get rid of the Watchwing support, and they've already probably
super
triggered it
slow.
3 or 4 times.
Yeah, yeah, for
Which
sure.
would be an
So
argument to using the one cost one. However, the one cost one also makes it so only the Vine Grafter can grab it, and it can be protected by like them sacrificing an Argentport blueprint or something.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So yeah, if there's one market slot I would change, it's probably the Disrupt because I think I only fetched it versus Spiff, and even then it didn't felt that good. So yeah, but I'm not sure yet what card it should be.
I
Um,
know for a time it was Vara's choice as a way
yeah,
to have both grafters grab a kind of removal-esque spell.
yeah, yeah. I could certainly could see that. Yeah. Oh.
All right, so let's talk about your matches. Do you have any notable Swiss round matches that you wanted to talk about? Anyone that gave you particular trouble?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the my first 4 Swiss rounds went pretty well. I went 4-0. But the last match in the Swiss was versus Spifferific on his AP mid slash Valkyries list. And yeah, that matchup felt atrocious from my side. It was yeah, it was not a pretty sight. I almost had no chance. I think I won the second game because I think he was pretty flooded. He didn't play a lot of cards that game, but the other games were very lopsided in his favor. Um, because yeah, he has a couple of cards that are super difficult for the Mandrake side to deal with. Yeah, like I remember the Rail Driver Valkyrie. It's the
The two mana 1/3
yeah,
ultimate. When you play an attachment, you can play an attachment. You can play a snipe, which will get rid of your regen.
yeah, get rid of the region or
Either
make
of
it
your
so
lords, right?
yeah, so it can you can develop the invasive creeper into it. The invasive creeper is the 2/1 that when you ultimate gives all your Mandrake's lifesteal, and I had that come up that he played that unit, and I was at 3 power, and I wanted to develop the creeper, but I knew yeah he's just gonna play an attachment, and he's just gonna kill my creeper for free. So that's already pretty difficult. And then the the one that turns into Investigator West, Forensic Analyst.
Yep.
You want 4 flyer that when you have an attachment put into your void, it becomes Investigator West, 4 for flying, and when he attacks, he gets a free 1/1 flyer. Yeah, so that was also super difficult to deal with because like you only have the file as a clean answer in your main deck. If you don't have it, yeah, and victimless crime if you can kill it right away. But yeah, when it flips, you can't even victimless crime rest anymore because it's a hero now.
Yeah, you can't victimless crime, and it also flips to become a fork, so you can't defile it either. It just gets out of both of your removal spell
Yeah,
range.
yeah. So you need to deal with it super fast. And if you don't have the removal the turn it comes into play, and that's even hoping that Spiff can't get the attachment in his void the same turn. Yeah, he had it flip versus me, and I had to go to my market to silence it, but then it's still a 4/4 on board,
And you
and
can
you
also
spend an
silence it with the 4 cost 3/5, right? That silences at the start of your turn.
yeah, but that's banking on the fact that Spiff can't deal with your 3/5 in that time range, of course, which
Right.
is also a tough thing to do. And then um, yeah, he gets all this card advantage with his Velk Warp, of course. He also has the Unionist, Tinker Unionist. So in the late game, he's just gonna swarm the board with all those Unionists. So it's yeah, it's really tough to also when he warps one of his weapons, so he can start demolishing your board to get through. So yeah, I felt like Spiff was really well prepared for the Mandrake matchup. He knew that people would bring Mandrakes, and his list was pretty geared to beat it. It feels
Yes.
like.
Spifrific was my favorite to win the event as a whole. he had been practicing for probably like 3 weeks out at this point, and while I was building, the 50 plus decks that I put in my article, the person that I was like throwing those deck against was the AP Valkyrie mid-range deck that originally started
Mm,
as a Justice Primal Shadow with Valen Adept, but was over time like developed more into a Valkyrie package. And
okay. Yeah.
this got tuned against probably the biggest field that Peasant will ever see because of how many different decks I played against him.
That's
The
pretty
only deck that
cool.
I really didn't, the only deck that I didn't really didn't play was I didn't have that same version of Skycrag Control, and that was what he lost to in the top eight against Perth.
Yeah, yeah. I noticed that I think he lost to 2-0 versus Perth or something. Yeah. So it must have been a rough matchup, or yeah, I haven't seen it, so maybe his draws are bad as well. I don't know. Um, yeah. So, but yeah, versus Mandrakes, it felt like this AP mid Valkyrie list was pretty bonkers. Yeah.
It definitely was built to be played as the game goes on. I think some of the issues that it has against things like the Skycrag Control list are no matter how much like you swarm the board with small units, you're still like dying to a cover from the storm or a full tilt.
Yeah.
And like the Throne Warden has Aegis and is a 4/4, but if that's like all you're slamming down, it
Yeah.
is not super great. It also helps that he's playing a lot of cards that don't really work against Skycrag. For example, the martial efficiency cannot amplify like at
Oh
all.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So like
Because they
Watchroom
don't have
support,
units into play.
right? So that doesn't work at all. Defile is a dead
Yeah.
card.
Yeah.
Victimless
Yeah.
crime in the market or is in the market, so that's a little bit better. But you really
Yeah.
have to hope for just giant units off of Watchwing support, and you can't even like feed them in the same way because there's no martial efficiency combo.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's probably one of those classic mid-range versus control, and then control just comes out on top. Yeah.
All right. So how did your top eight go against what I want to call the mirror, but I don't think it was really a mirror against A Boss
No.
with Mandrake Reanimator.
Yeah, he had a crazy list. Um, yeah, I think it went down to the wire 2-1 also. Yeah, there were a lot of differences between our lists, also some similarities. I was a little nervous before we played our game because he also went a little bigger. He had the corpse blooms, I think, the 7/7s in his list. He had the wait, let me pull it up. His list.
Yeah, so
But he had
Abos's list was based around using Gravitor Trainee to discard
yeah,
a card from your hand of your choice,
yeah,
Sporefolk, and Darkwater Vines to discard Corpse Bloom and Shoal Dredgers to reanimate them with Shoal Stirrings. You also can
yeah,
discard Send a Messages as a removal spell,
yeah,
so while you're like discarding cards to get more card advantage.
yeah. So yeah, I think it could go either way. I I didn't know exactly who would be favored before we were playing it. I think his version was a bit more built to high roll because you can actually control what units would go into the void with your Spore Fork, so you don't know if you're gonna hit the big ones. And then even if he hit the big ones, yeah, I have some good removal spells still. But if he can land the send a message at the crucial point, it could go wrong for me. Um, there are also yeah, and if he his plan is to mill himself a bunch to get a sheep's soul dredger, I also have the defiles which can remove it. Also, which I think was, yeah, I think defile is actually also pretty insane in the mirror, and he wasn't playing it. He was
Right.
only playing the 4 victimless crimes.
And then
Um,
two eavesdrops to take your void.
yeah, but I have 3 eavesdrops, so I have one more eavesdrop, which is also pretty important in the mirror. And
Yep.
and then the fact that he wasn't running any defiles. So if you can steal a unit and put it into your void, that's actually also super important
Right.
in a mirror, because you're just fighting for voids. Because the more you can get their units into your voids, the better your shoal stirrings become and the worse their shoal stirrings become. Um, so I think my version would be a bit more consistent than his, but I could see if he had good mills and he could indeed have good reanimations, then it could be rough for me. Um, yeah, and then we both took a game, and then the third game was then the most important one, and yeah, there I took the game on the back of two eavesdrops. Like I landed an eavesdrop on, I think on turn 4 or 5, he had only 2 cards left in his hand, and I took his last 2 cards and his full void,
Yeah,
and
that's one
then
thing about eavesdrop is that it's not just a steal your void card. It is a rip your hand apart card.
yeah,
And if
yeah,
you don't keep that like extra like power or extra card in hand, then you're gonna get ripped apart. And the problem with mandrakes is, I think the only real downside of mandrakes is that you don't draw cards. You are
yeah,
in every case a mid-range deck that is playing off the top and trying to key together your certain cards. You're not like ever going up on cards. So once you start to get down to 1 or 2 cards, if you can get eavesdropped, you are out. Like that is just top decking for the rest of the game.
yeah. Yeah, and that was what happened. He had a better board at that point, but I knew like I just gotta eavesdrop him now. And then yeah, I also still had a regen shield on my Darkwater Vines, I think, to block his Shoal Dredger if I needed to, and then I could just win on card advantage and on my ultimate that I still had. And he tried to come back by going to his market and getting the Angelo Smite. But then he bricked on power and he couldn't throw his 6 power in time, and then I had my second eavesdrop, and yeah, that did him in at that point. So yeah, but it was a tense match for sure.
See, your next game was against Marvin the Imp, a preparation game for Phoenix or for Lord Perth in the finals. But it's
Yeah,
also a match you already played, right? You played against both
yeah,
Lord Perth and Marvin in the
yeah,
Swiss.
yeah, yeah. That's right. Yeah, yeah. I met Marvin in round 4, I think, in the Swiss. Um, yeah. So yeah, I like playing Marvin because he's a great player and a very positive influence in the community. And yeah, we had fun games. I think, yeah, so what you said, I played both Marvin and Bert in the Swiss and I won both times. So I was pretty feeling pretty good in the matchup. I think Mandrakes is a bit favored versus Skycrack Control. Um, because yeah, you have a lot of cards that are good in the matchup and not a lot of dead cards. I think the only dead card is the file. Um, but yeah, you have a lot of units that they have a lot of trouble dealing with. Like you have 2 play sets of regen units with the Darkwater Vines and a Vine Grafter. And like regen is just, yeah, it's super sick versus Skycrack Control because all their removal is damage based,
Yep.
except for their 1 permafrost in the market.
That's something
So
that I identified as part of the coverage was that the Mandrake's job is to try to give your other units regen via Vine Grafter and
yeah,
then recur those specific regen units over and over again so
yeah,
that the control deck is forced to spend 2 and 3 and 4 cards on getting rid of your units to counteract the card advantage that the Skycrack control deck has overall.
yeah, 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 and that's for sure what happened in our matches. It was yeah. So the regen units are super important, but even also the speed grafter is also very good because it has charge and can give another thing charge. And I think I did it in one or multiple games versus Marvin that I was able to give the shoulder edger charge
Yeah,
with
we
the
didn't
speed
see the
grafter.
full match against Marvin in the top 4, but we did see coming in on the end of the second game, which was your 2-0, and you had a, what was it? A speed grafter in play already, but you had a speed grafter in hand that you drew for a turn, which allowed you to kill them at 4 with only one blocker. And funnily enough, speed grafter, who was only really included as an ultimate trigger and another way to access the market, like the charge ends up being very good in the control matchup.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It was really helpful as well in that matchup. And then yeah, you also have the Goliath fly trap, which may seem a little odd. It's just a 3/5, but the 5 toughness is also super important.
Right.
Uh, because yeah, 5 is so much if they want to kill it with damage-based removal.
They've got to
They
like
need,
cover plus bullseye or double
yeah,
soulfire, or they have to string
yeah,
together 2 cards, and that's what I was talking about. Like as soon as you can
yeah,
start making them spend 2 or 3 cards to kill one of your units, you're gaining so much value on them.
yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. So you can make their life so miserable in a lot of ways, and then yeah, you have all these units that are good versus them, and you can yeah, you can bring them back with shoal stirrings or with machinations from the market. You have the curtain call or a crucial turn in which they hope to still stop you. Um, so yeah, yeah, the only trouble is yeah. Um, if you draw too much dead cards versus them, like the defiles or yeah, eavesdrop can be good, but they have like 8 ways to gain face ages, so it's actually not that easy to fire it off on them. Um, yeah, I tried, but I
Right.
don't think I've made it happen in the tournament because they have more ways to gain face ages than you have to remove plus eavesdrop. So
Right.
um,
It is notable though that their ways to gain face ages are slow. Right. They have the
yeah,
Cobalt Waystone
yeah,
and they have the On's Favor.
yeah.
They don't play like a Sorcerer's Choice, for example. I know I was playing around with that card a lot in a time-based, like a FTP control, where you could play Sorcerer's Choice as a Lightning Storm on the opponent's turn, or you could use it to gain face ages at instant speed to protect things like your Tomb.
Hmm.
Um, they do, however, play the Four of Delivery to grab Obstructive Flicker and Caleb's Choice out of the market to counter a number of your eavesdrops if you can break the ages.
Hmm. Yeah,
So it's not always as reliable to have that be your game plan to stop them from winning. You also have that backup plan of trying to use Invasive Creeper to give all of your units lifesteal and get yourself out of the burn range.
yeah,
So let's move
uh,
on to Lord Parth's match, which again,
yeah,
very similar deck, if not the exact 80 cards. Wink, wink.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
They're teammates for a reason. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I was also feeling pretty good because I had already won 3 of the matches versus Skycrack Control. Um, so I knew it wasn't into the bag yet, but I think yeah, I have a good shot.
Yeah, having
But
come off of Swiss winning 2 matches against Skycrag Control, winning a third match against Skycrag Control in the top 4, I would be feeling pretty good to see my finals
yeah.
opponent is on Skycrag Control. I don't know
Yeah,
about
for
you.
sure. Yeah, I was just looking at the bracket. I was just yeah, hoping that I didn't have to face Spifferific again because I knew yeah, if I have to face Spiff, yeah, I'm not gonna win probably. But and then yeah, Skycrack Control, I already did it in 3 times, so yeah, I was feeling pretty good. That said, it was still pretty difficult
Yeah, you did
because
drop a game to Lord Perth. I believe,
yeah,
if I recall, that was you had a hand of like some invasive creepers and some like speed grafters and no regen units, and you just
yep.
couldn't stabilize onto the board, and everything that you were killing was getting or playing was getting killed.
Yeah, yeah. The thing is, I don't know if people saw that during the coverage. I had to mull to 6 in game 1 and in game 2,
All
so that
right.
was already pretty devastating. So after the first game, I was feeling good that I was able to take that first game on 6 cards. And then I had to mull to 6 again in the second game, and it was, I think the first game it was 2 hands with 2 power, and in the second hand I had some pretty expensive cards. And then in game 2 I had, I think in my second hand, I think first hand also 2 power, second hand 4 power, I think 1 unit, 1 removal spell, and an eavesdrop. So I thought, yeah, that's much too slow. I'm not gonna be able to put enough pressure. So I had to get to 6 again. And then, yeah, then I had, I think, double vicious creeper. Um, yeah, I don't know my hand exactly. Double vicious creeper were the units, I think. Yeah, I don't know what. I think 3 power and another card. I can't remember.
So
Um,
one thing I'm curious about, because you're also mentioning going to six a lot, uh, another thing that I've come to be like acutely aware of from Magic and other card games, but
mhm.
haven't been as aware of in this game because I'm not sure if the difference is that much worse here, or at least in this format. How often were you on the play versus on the draw against these Skycrack control decks, and do you think
Ooh.
it matters or makes a difference?
Oh, I honestly can't remember it, how much I was on the play versus Skycrack Control. Um, Maybe you should ask the same question to Port or to Marvin. Maybe they remember better. But I don't have the feeling that that was a deciding factor versus them. Like I said, I think it's more the cards you have. Like I already mentioned all the units which I think are fantastic,
Sure.
which are yeah, I mentioned 4 units for which you are playing play sets. So I
The,
think if you get a combination of those units, yeah, then you have a very good shot. If you draw too much removal spells and eavesdrop too soon, so you can't put enough pressure, then it gets a lot harder.
Yeah, the only
Um,
reason I bring that up is because if we're going to see a rise in control decks,
mhm,
beforehand in Peasant we really didn't because we didn't have a good
mhm,
sweeper. Like the best thing we had was something like
mhm,
Cover from the Storm, which doesn't answer everything by a long shot. But now that
mhm,
we have things like Full Tilt, it becomes more of a question of can you do X thing before turn 5, right? It was the same
mhm,
question in Throne for a while where people were playing Harsh Rule, or
mhm,
and eventually there was the Combray version. You have to consider like what are we trying to do before the opponent can get to their cover or before they can get to their full tilt. And
yeah,
as you said, like a lot of it is playing those regen units. Uh,
yeah,
you don't necessarily have to play your lords early in this matchup. You want to make sure that you can have some way to protect them, be it like getting a regen trigger off on it, or if you play them early, start amassing some triggers as soon as possible. Like you play your
mhm.
what is that card? Carl? The Xenon one that whenever you gain life, you make a second Mandrake. Getting that in
Venomous
play.
Nightshade.
Venomous
Yeah,
Nightshade, immediately
yeah,
gaining that life with like
yeah,
Avara's Favor or something, so that even if they kill it, you now
yeah,
have like a 1, 2, 3 curve and you discard pile for Machinations or something
yeah,
similar.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to get the value, um, of course, and yeah, it's also important to put pressure. So yeah, like in the second game, I was already at 6, and yeah, I didn't have the good units, so I think I overcommitted, but it was on purpose that I did it. Like I think the only way you win that game is if you put a lot of pressure early and you pray they don't have the sweeper, because if you are just saving your units and not committing anything to the board, yeah, then you just give them time and they can just draw cards, and then it's not gonna get better in the late game. They just gonna have more removal. If you play
Right.
out your threats one by one, they just gonna trade one by one. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but sometimes it happens in Eternal. I'm often reluctant to go to 6, but yeah, your hand needs a game plan, and if you have a hand that you know is too risky or you don't has enough pressure, then you have to do it and hope you get a good 6 card hand.
Well, you ended up getting that good hand in the final game and
Yeah.
ended up taking it home. So now that it's over, in your opinion, what are some of the best decks that you should be thinking about for the next tournament, which is a week and a half away, right? It is on April 15th.
Yeah.
Marvin is hosting a tournament which now has well over $100
Yeah.
because Lord Perth and Marvin are using their winnings from this tournament to fund their own.
Oh.
So
Wow, that's very generous of them. Yeah.
So
All
you
right.
can expect to see, what is it, like at least $150. I know it was originally at like 90 and then we just had it 75. So it's going to
Okay.
be somewhere in the 160 range at least. What
That's
are you
cool.
thinking
It's very
about
cool.
in terms of decks for that tournament going forward?
Um, yeah, I think the tournament is probably going to be heavily influenced by what happened during your tournament now. So I think there's actually some kind of triangle now. I'm looking at it. Yeah, I think Skycrack Control will be brought again because I think it's a pretty strong deck. It obviously had, yeah, it put two people into the top eight during this tournament.
Yeah, the
Uh,
conversion rate was three people in the Swiss. One was a 2-3, one was a 3-2, and one was a 4-1, and
yeah,
it went from like 18% to 25% as a conversion
yeah,
rate.
yeah. It's pretty good. And then two people got to the semifinals with it and one to the finals. So uh, it's a pretty good deck, I think. And I think then, yeah, Skycrack Control wins versus, yeah, Argenport mid, Valkyries, which is another great deck, I think, which the version Spiv brought. So I think that's also one of the best decks in the format because that deck beats Mandrakes pretty hard, which I was on. So that's kind of a triangle, I think. I think Mandrakes beats Skycrack Control. Skycrack Control beats AP mid Valkyries, and Valkyries beats Mandrakes.
So
And yeah, there's probably also going to be the Life Force aggro deck because
right.
that also converted pretty well into the top eight.
Where do you think
Um,
do you think aggro has a place in this current meta? Like right now we only saw the Life Force aggro decks make their way into the top cut. And I
yeah.
guess they may put a damper on other aggro decks even making it in because aside from
Hmm.
mid-range and control decks, the aggro decks have to face a mirror of life gain, which
Yeah.
is a little hard. Do you think other non-life gain aggro decks have a place in this current format?
Uh, I'm not the biggest believer in other aggro decks that aren't based on life gain because for the reasons you just said, yeah, I think if you are an aggro deck and you have to face that life gain aggro deck, yeah, that's super miserable. I don't see how that can win.
So
Uh,
we actually saw a really close match with I guess it wasn't like super close because it was a 2-0, but both of the games came down to like a turns difference where Life Gain Aggro by Apple Chips, I believe, was
yeah,
playing against Jace on the Rakano aggro that had like
yeah,
the OTK style with double damage plus big units with Overwhelm or Berserk would just steal the game, and it constantly felt
yeah,
like it was one turn or one draw off of just crushing the life gain deck.
hmm
Uh,
yeah.
there's, I'm also toying around with a deck for Praxis aggro that gets to play Combustion Brawler, and I don't know if that's a bad choice or not, but I I'm thinking about it.
hmm
Combustion Brawler is
Yeah.
a 5 cost 6/4 with Overwhelm that says your opponent can't gain life. And then it has a shift 4 to exhaust an enemy unit. So you can shift it against the life gain deck so that they can't deal with it for 3 turns while you continue to put on pressure.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. That's a cool interaction. Yeah, didn't know that card. Um, yeah, but I still wonder. Yeah, I think it's hard for aggro in this format because yeah, Vine Grafter is so omnipresent in so much decks. And then, yeah, in the decks that it isn't present, that's probably gonna be the Skycrack control decks, which are just made to sweep everything up and kill all those little units. So I think aggro that isn't Life Force is gonna have a really rough time. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone breaks the format. I don't know. Yeah. Uh, yeah, I think the three decks I mentioned, that's the decks I expect to do well next week.
So those
Or
are all decks.
if someone can come up with a deck that's good versus all those three or two of those three, that's but yeah, I'm curious to see what will rise up because I really like people like you and Spifferific and Team Natavra who are innovating and trying out all these different things. And bringing new decks to the format. I know I haven't the time at the moment to do all this stuff, but I really like that people are doing that because it's fun to have a new format or something that's a bit more fresh than throwing an expedition all the time.
So I guess you did say that you don't really have the time, but outside of the decks that we saw at this tournament, are there any key cards that can like go into archetypes or just cards or decks in general that you didn't see in this tournament that you still think are relevant and good that you think would still be a good call for this current metagame?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's more of a I have to go. Yeah, I have to think a bit about that because yeah, like I said, I don't have the time to playtest a lot, but so it's more of a theoretical exercise in what I think would be good versus the meta game. Um, yeah, I think what you mentioned on stream, uh, which wasn't broad but could be good if the meta game is like control decks and mid-range decks, like Skycrack control deck and the Mandrakes and the AP mid lists. Maybe Cambrai Ramp might have a place in this metagame. I think I also tried it one or two games, one of the Cambrai Ramp lists that was shared in the Gauntlet, but I quickly dismissed it because it's a bit slow. So if you face aggro or quick lists or
Right.
flying or Aegis, it gets rough.
I know that like I always bring up Combray because in testing that is the one deck. As Lord Perth said, Lord Perth felt that Mandrakes and the Skycrag were like maybe like a 55-45 or a 60-40 in favor of Mandrakes, where
Yeah.
when I was testing with Mandrakes against Combray, it felt like a 90-10 in favor of Combray.
Mm-hmm.
Between playing Desert Marshals to silence the random early Mandrakes to having things like Edict of Kodash to just totally deal with their units, and then ramping into cards like From the Heavens that can not only sweep the board, but then present a threat that Mandrakes cannot block that will quickly end the game. It's
Yeah.
a thing that Mandrakes has a hard time dealing with.
Yeah, for sure. Just like, yeah, it's difficult to tell what if people are also gonna be on these Life Force aggro decks. I think Cambrai Ramp will probably quickly fall to that because it's just too fast. So that's
Again,
the
I'm not super sure about that because I think that it also depends on the life gain style, right?
yeah,
If we're talking about like not playing any paintings which trigger the lifesteal on their own, being able to silence the units that will gain you the life will stop them from triggering all their lifesteal units and it'll keep their units at very small stats. And
yeah,
at least the updated Cranberry ramp list, like there's one of the article that I posted that Spiff built that I wasn't super sure on how to build the deck, and he was the one that has been tuning that list more, so we used his list. But it seems like there's a lot more good units nowadays that deck can play, especially with things like Speed Grafter. If you stutter at all, Speed Grafter can get Grumbro's Platoon. and use all of that extra power the ramp deck got to just crush you with platoon. Like they will play 5, 6, 3/2s all with charge and just deal you out, 18 damage in a turn. But it also can apply pressure with Speedcrafter and Myrmidon Builder to hit in for 5 every turn while ramping you. So like not only are they ramping, but they are like applying pressure now. The deck has kind of changed since its last iteration.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen the list, I think. I think I've tried it out. So I yeah, that's what I say. Like if enough people are on the mid range and control list, I could see Comrade Ramp being a really good choice if you predict that meta right. But I'm still unsure if yeah, if there's aggro, and I mainly think Life Force aggro. I know you mentioned like yeah, you can silence the units, but there's like I think the 4 Desert Marshal. I don't know if there's any other silence in the Cumbery Ramp list.
Let's bring it up. Hold on one second while I. So this deck has 4 Defiance against aggro, 4 Desert Marshal against aggro, 4 Desert Alchemist against aggro. Is
Yeah.
playing 2 Scorpion Wasps, and then up to the higher curve has Cloud Screepers, Binding Agreements, Minotaur Ambassador, From the Heavens, and Omen Scar Worm. In the market, it has Alessi's Choice, Grumbo's Platoon, Unmake, Moondial, and Myrmidon Builder.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, it has some good anti-aggro tools, I think, but yeah, it's like with every RAM deck, I think you're also yeah, sometimes just skipping turn 3 and 4 because you're playing the ramp cards, and those are kind of free attack turns for the aggro deck. So that's yeah, that's the gamble that you take because yeah, Mandrakes and AP mid, they don't put a lot of pressure in those early turns 3 and 4. But if you're up against an aggro deck who goes 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, then you can get into a lot of trouble, of course, unless you have the hand with a lot of those cards you mentioned, and you can fight with them to stem the bleeding time.
right. So yeah, it does seem like it could interact well with Matrix. You may also consider running some Edict of Kodash, especially if you're considering the life gain deck to be a thing. It's a way to silence
Yep.
and kill units. And in
Mm-hmm.
the case where it doesn't kill things, it still silences them, so the life gain triggers slow down a little bit. It's playing unmakes in the market to get rid of the hives. I think the deck
Yep.
is solid against most of the field, and if the Vine Grafter and Life Force aggro decks are holding back other aggro decks, like other more low to the ground explosive aggro decks that kind of just get stonewalled by Vine Grafters and whatnot, then I think this deck could shine in a metagame with Skycrag control, with Argentport, with the
Yep.
Vine Grafters. Especially
Yeah.
since its Wrath of God, which is its harsh rule, is from the
Yeah.
heavens, and
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
heavens doesn't care about regen. It doesn't care about like damage or like how big your units are. It will just kill them.
Yeah. That is true. It's the best harsh rule versus mid-range deck, so for sure, because yeah, Vinegrafter is so omnipresent, as I said. Just kills everything stone cold. Yeah.
And then against control, if the control decks are still working off of burn damage, they're never killing Omen Scarworm. And Omen Scarworm is going to draw this Combo Ramp deck so many cards against them.
Yeah, that, and then you also have the platoon kill, where
Yep.
you go, you give them all charge and attack in 1 turn, so they can't use their slow speed sweepers that turn, and yeah, they're just gonna die that turn probably. Yeah.
So I think this deck, while it didn't see any play this tournament, has been a fan favorite of certain players and is still a solid choice in this meta.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so as well. Yeah.
But we have passed the 1 hour mark. I think it is about time that we start wrapping it up. Are there any final notes, any Um, Nods you want to give to anybody? Any shout outs you want to make?
Yeah, just for my team as well. I think Team Invoke Lethal, and yeah, my teammate Apple Chips is always very helpful in testing and in yeah uh, saying what he thinks of the meta and what is good. And I also brought the Life Force deck to the top 8, so that's also pretty good. Um, yeah, and just everyone on our team, I'm super grateful to be in it and to be playing with them. And yeah, that's about it, I think.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the interview. I know we didn't get a chance to do it after tournament. Both you and Perth were in the same time zone. You know, you're playing almost close to midnight, and you didn't want to wake anybody up doing the interview. But I appreciate you taking the time today. I appreciate everyone for staying here and listening to this hour-long talk about Eternal and Peasant and all that fun. On April 15th, then that will be the next Peasant tournament hosted by Team Not Tavrod. And as I said, well over $100 in the prize pool, and it'll be a fun time. That's also part of their Throwdown to World, so it is the first tournament that will have points towards their World Championships. And beyond that, it won't be another Peasant tournament until July 29th officially.
Mm. Yeah,
So thanks so
it's
much for listening, everybody.
yeah, thank you.